A very warm welcome once again, ladies and gentlemen, to the ESG 101. It's fantastic to see that we have attracted an audience from various parts of Africa and the world. Today, we shall tackle the topic of ESG under the theme of premise and practice in the African context. I kindly request that you use the Q&A function on Zoom to put across any question to our speakers. Also, you can share your thoughts, comments, and engage with us through the chat section so that we can have a very interactive session. This masterclass has been brought to you by Newmark Group under the auspices of Influence XXI, a monthly series of high-powered conversation covering a variety of issues in leadership, strategy, sustainability, and development. My name is Rina Modoni, Head of Market Research and Insight in the Newmark Group, and it's a pleasure to be your speaker for the day. So to start us off, I want to give us some background about this masterclass, because this is going to be a monthly series that seeks to unveil the complexity of ESG, delving into its core principles, how it's shaping the future of businesses within Africa and the rest of the world, while highlighting its premise and practice. Today, we'll hear from two distinguished experts, which both of them have a wealth of knowledge and experience in the field. So do expect to leave here with some very key insights. We shall have an introduction session with Gilbert Manirakiza, CEO and President of the Newmark Group, which is one of Africa's fastest growing advisory companies dealing with strategic communication, research, digital marketing, and experiential management, offering 360 degrees communication strategies for over 30 African markets with global scalability through the Public Relations Global Network, one of the world's largest network of specialized communications. We'll also get a keynote address from Michael Diegelmann, founder and CEO of Cometis, one of the leading consulting companies with over 20 years of know-how on the capital market, an ESG advisory within Germany. So without any further ado, I shall give the floor to Gilbert Manirakiza, who will kick us off with an introduction on ESG so that we can understand this terminology and also get to see its evolution and understand why has ESG become a trending topic, surpassing all businesses alike, small or large. Gilbert, over to you.
Thank you, Rina. I'm very happy to be here, particularly with you and also Michael, who is an eminent expert in all matters ESG. And in fact, I'm very humbled because his reputation precedes him. Anyone who looks him up will know that he's one of the foremost authorities in this field. And I hope that those who have joined us will ask as many questions as they can, but also will follow up in case you need specific support within your organization or company so that you can get ESG right. ESG is very important, and ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance outcomes that we have within our societies. And it's generally a term that is found in the corporate world. Although I'm supposed to provide an introduction, I wouldn't want to go so far because I know that Michael has a fantastic presentation that will go much deeper into this introductory aspect of ESG. But what I want to start by premising is that ESG has a lot to do with the intent of companies to have environmental, social, and governance outcomes in addition to the other core outcomes that companies and organizations are usually set up to achieve. But even as we say that, we have to keep in mind one very fundamental aspect. In the prevailing economic context of today, companies in particular are not set up to specifically achieve environmental, social, and governance outcomes. They are generally established to give value or to generate value for shareholders. And these are shareholders who have deployed capital so that they set up an entity that can produce goods or services of value to a customer in a context which could be what we call a market. This could be a country, this could be a continent, it could be a region, it could be a group of countries. But generally speaking, that brings into context the four players of that economic ecosystem. So you have the shareholder, you have the customer, you have the company itself in terms of employees, and you have those entities or individuals or stakeholders who regulate the market itself, or who determine what happens in a given market. And therefore, it means that the outcomes that that company or that corporation is going to generate will heavily rely on the interactions between those four economic stakeholders. And therefore, it means that in order for a company to achieve its primary objective, which is to generate a return for the shareholders, that is in the form of profit, going back to the shareholders on one end, and on the other end, services and goods to customers, the interactions between these stakeholders have to be optimal. But it also means that if a change has to occur within this ecosystem, that change can be triggered by one of these stakeholders. And over the years, we have seen a situation whereby companies have grown of age. We especially in the 90s, we started seeing the development of truly global companies, truly large ecosystems that are in some cases much bigger than countries, much more influential. However, we've seen that also the outcomes of the activities of companies have led to what we could call side effects. And these side effects are negative outcomes that accompany the positive outcomes flowing to either shareholders or customers or employees themselves. And these side effects, these negative outcomes that are tied to the activities of companies, have given rise to a new type of objective, an objective to mitigate these side effects and to help go beyond profit and serve, and also go beyond products and services, and seek to have a more positive impact on either the environment, the society, and in terms of governance. And essentially, that is where corporate sustainability, in my view, got its rootings. And I believe that Michael will help perhaps look at this in more context as an expert. But generally speaking, when we look at Africa, which is one of the regions I tend to want to look at, we see that it's really in the 90s that the conversation around corporate social responsibility started becoming more mainstream. But it was mostly driven by foreign multinationals doing business in Africa, mostly because customers in the developed world, and as you remember, customers are one of the stakeholders in the four stakeholder ecosystem I described. Customers were the ones driving this call for better outcomes. And companies responded in like manner by introducing more corporate social responsibility. Obviously, before that, this was already there, but in Africa, it's really in the 90s that we started seeing a lot of clamor for more corporate involvement in finding solutions to challenges in Africa, although the scale was not that big. And we noticed at the time that local companies were not as active in this field. It's mostly multinationals that were very active in this particular domain. Into the 2000s, something very fundamental happened, which was the introduction of the Millennium Development Goals. Many of you may remember these as the very first truly global development blueprint that guided governments and different social actors on the type of development outcomes that the world should be aiming at. And this became very critical for companies because for the first time, I believe, they had a very clear set of goals to contribute to as companies, in addition to the overall fundamental corporate goal of profit to shareholders. Although this blueprint was very helpful and gave companies something to contribute to, and many of them indeed started aligning themselves with specific goals that they felt they were more suited to help achieve, we didn't really see a very fundamental shift in the way businesses were conducting their activities. The uh, the achievement of environmental, social, and governance objectives was pretty much an add-on and tended to have fringe budgets and fringe consideration as far as companies are concerned. This has since changed because we have had various models going from CSR to sustainability, which is a much more comprehensive approach to achieving social, environmental, and governance goals. And now we have seen companies adopt more robust processes and tools to achieve goals on this in these dimensions, and that is why ESG is becoming more of a prominent model. It's a prominent model that is not, as in my view, as widely adopted in Africa. Obviously, Michael will give us an overall picture of what's happening globally as well. But there is room for more, particularly because ESG calls upon not just having objectives on social, environmental, and governance aspects being an add-on, something that you fringely add to the profit objective, but it actually calls upon companies to fundamentally change their identities into becoming entities that have a net positive outcome under the three dimensions. And for that to happen, obviously a number of strategies have to be adopted. Companies have to look inwardly. They have to profoundly analyze their context and adopt the right strategies. This is not always a very easy process. In fact, it's not an easy process at all. And that is why experts like Michael and ourselves are usually involved. But we are at a time where the world is at a turning point, particularly when you look at Africa. And maybe I can say something or two about the imperatives that we see in Africa. Africa is one of the regions that has the fastest demographic growth in the world. In fact, within this century, that is before, by 2050, 1 in 4 humans will be African. Africans will be a quarter of the global population. Just imagine how significant that is. 2.5 billion people between now and 2050, which means that one additional billion people in Africa will be added to the global population. This can be positive. Many people call it the demographic dividend. We've seen other regions of the world developing fast because of having strong, big youth populations that are able to produce goods and services. This is certainly very positive for corporations and for nations. However, this is also happening in an environment that has significant challenges such as climate change, which is destroying many sectors such as agriculture, or at least destroying jobs in those sectors. So it means that in this context, companies cannot afford to just do business as usual and just chase shareholder value. They actually have to think very critically how they are going to operate in this context that has significant potential, but also significant potential challenges that come with this one factor I've just described of a large population, a large youthful population in a context that is not producing nearly as many jobs as this youthful population needs, and also a context that actually may be taking away some of the jobs because of issues such as climate change. So there are many considerations for companies currently, and not just companies, but also governments that have to work with these companies to create a new economic philosophy that integrates not just doing business for the sake of turning in a profit, but also in addition to the profit, having a net positive effect, which requires a fundamental review of how business operate in the region. and beyond, of course. And because of the globalized nature of the economy, we can't even talk about regions anymore. Whatever is true for Africa is also true for the rest of the world. I would like to stop there in terms of my introductory remarks and hand over back to you, Rina, so that you can also bring in our keynote speaker, who indeed is the superstar of the show today, and I'll come in later in the Q&A segment. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gilbert, for that session. Indeed, once you put the insights and the numbers behind the potential and the magnitude that Africa has, then we're able to actually drive this conversation further. And that's why this masterclass is relevant, because we are the ones who are going to be the pace setters of Africa and have ESG be the core of the conversation and what we want to achieve. So I'll bring on board Michael Diegelmann. As I mentioned, he has a very extensive amount of years under the topic of ESG. When it comes to advisory, when it comes to reporting, investor relations, and how better for us to start by hearing the premises of ESG and understand why is ESG important, not only from us as African, but globally, because if you're not within the streams of ESG, then you're not doing something right. Michael, I give the floor to you.
Thank you. And thank you for the warm words you said. I hope I'm not disappointing you here. Let me tell you that my experience is that many people out there who claim they know a lot about sustainability and ESG, I consider myself a student because it's a learning process and it's an ongoing process. And I'm very honored to be able to speak here and was invited by Newmark. And I brought some good news and some bad news for you. Let me start with the good news. Good news is for all of those people who are really interested to dive into the field of sustainability. And if you're willing to show stamina and dive into it and learn, you will never, ever in your lifetime have problems finding a job. That's no problem. The bad news is, if you do that, most likely you will not make a lot of friends, because if you dive into sustainability and ESG, you will have to ask a lot of nasty questions. And as you know, people who ask questions, what happens to them sometimes? However, I'm a positive person and it worked out for me pretty well to dive into that topic. Let me see if I can share my screen with you and my presentation. So let's see if that works. Okay, it says I have to leave the webinar and rejoin because I had some tech. I will be back in a second, okay? Sorry for that, to be able to share my screen.
Okay, all right. Dear attendees, please bear with us as we give Michael 5 seconds to rejoin so that we can dive into his presentation. I know you have all been anticipating for this so that we can better understand what ESG is all about. So let's just give him 5 more seconds. But I'd like to also remind us, please use the Q&A section to raise any questions towards our speaker, because we will have a Q&A section at the very end. You can also tell us from where you're joining us from. We have a very diverse team which are ready to engage with you. Should you also want any comments, any feedback? So please do make use of the Q&A section on the Zoom platform. Thank you.
So can you just give me a sign if you see my screen now?
Yes, yes, you can, Michael. You may proceed.
Perfect. Sorry for the inconvenience. Technology is not my friend. However, it's a good helper to lead you through the presentation. I put together a few slides, and if you to lead you through what I call from zero to hero, give you an overview of what sustainability is, and imagine you are a landowner and you have a forest and you sell wood. If you chop all the trees and sell it, you may make a lot of money, but it's not very sustainable, because if you don't replant new trees, there's no money in the future, and there's no feeding of your families and the surroundings in the future. Given that, what is sustainability and where does it come from? It comes from a so-called triple bottom line approach, which means planet, people, and prosperity. And unlike the financial statements you see in the annual reports, you find the progress and activities corporates take in their sustainability reports. And as I said in my introduction, it takes a lot of stamina to get into the ESG field. And ESG stands for environmental, social, and governance. And it's about data. It's not about that romantic view that you start a project and plant trees somewhere in Africa, Asia, or South America, or help poor children. That's activities you should do anyway. It's about a constant and detailed report on several factors. And we are in the middle. We're not in the beginning. We're in the middle of a fast-growing movement that stakeholders require more and more information. And the question is, what are the companies doing? And this is what ESG is about. It's quantifying what companies are doing in a very detailed way. And as I said, when I talk to some younger people here in Europe, or also in the US or in Africa, often I find people who have a romantic view on sustainability, and they believe they will change the world, and that's great. And please keep that that idea of it. However, it's a long path, and we meet a lot of populism out there. What we can see, and that's why I brought some media coverages in here, all around the globe, no matter how populistic some political leaders or company owners are towards sustainability activities, it's not going to go away. And I brought you this slide here, which is a spiral, and you start in the very beginning down here in number 1, because we are facing a lot of global challenges. Let me just summarize 2 of them. Number 1 is global warming, and you see it, especially, unfortunately, in Africa as well. And number 2, and this is something you also experience in Africa a lot, is a global inequality. And how can we manage that? How can we do something against it? Now, there are intergovernment organizations and non-government organizations who try to raise public opinion. That's you see on number 2, the IGOs and the NGOs. And they put a lot of pressure on the asset owners. Now, let's take a minute and talk about asset owners. Because when you hear that term, you often think, oh, those are the rich people around the globe. Yes, they are. But the true value and the true leverage effect comes from people like you and me, or our children who save for their retirement. Because we learned if you invest into stocks, then you make a higher return than keeping it under the pillow. So those asset owners understand if they want to have a future, they must make a decision what's being done with their money. And because the majority of asset owners do not manage their money themselves, they give it to asset managers, like BlackRock, for example, a big asset manager, or Vanguard, and give them criteria and say, look, I don't want you to invest into companies who cannot guarantee there's child labor involved in their products, or who pollute the environment, or who have a corrupt management. And then the asset managers obviously have to measure and check if those requirements are being fulfilled by the targets. Now, because there are millions and millions of companies out there who are reporting currently, asset managers cannot track themselves in detail how the companies are fulfilling those requirements. So they have intermediates like rating agencies, like frameworks, like index companies who helps them track the progress of companies. And this is all happening before governments step in. And we talk about governments in a minute, but the governments are crucial because what a government is making a decision on, that means companies are being held liable for. You can sue if they don't follow those regulations. Now you see all this is putting pressure on corporations to report on sustainability activities, and the spiral continues because the standards are not going to be lowered. That's the good news. If you dive into it and you start now, you will be part of that movement, and it's going to get more detailed. And also stakeholders will stand up. We see that they require more information, and if they don't get what they want, they will boycott companies. I've worked on several, boycott transactions, and it can only be lifted if you change behavior. Let me tell you that too. We talked about governments, and this is a chart which is just showing you globally how the number of regulatory instruments have increased. Now, for those of you who are a bit older, in 1997, that was when the Kyoto Protocol was approved. It took almost another 10 years, or it was signed in 1997, to have it approved in 2005. And it took another 10 years for the Paris Agreement to agree to limit global warming to 1.5%. Now, in order for that to come true, governments have to act. So they introduce more and more regulations, which corporates have to follow on. And therefore, they need people who do understand what needs to be done. And I'm just, flipping through this for a second, but it shows that, from Turkey, the UK, France, the European Union, Germany, Switzerland, the US, everyone is trying to introduce regulations to force companies to report more detail on their activities. And let me do a spotlight on the CSRD. CSRD stands for Corporate Social Responsibility Directive, which is a regulatory framework introduced by the European Union, which is in place as of now. And it requires corporates to report on their activities. CSRD has introduced the ESRS, lots of abbreviations. ESRS stands for the standards they have to report on. Very detailed. They have 12 booklets, 82 main KPIs. We translate that into a to-do list of over 700 different tasks for corporates to give a statement on. So very detailed. And now you can say, look, we are in Africa, it's far away from Europe. No. If you want to do business, or if you're a larger corporation in Africa that does business in the European Union or wants to do business in the European Union, as of 2029, you will fall under the same regulations as the European companies if you make more than 150 million of revenues in the European Union, or if you have a plant established here in Europe. So that gives you a little more time to build structures and collect data and change the mindset in top management that this is not going to go away. I brought you a couple of cases here, which shows you how serious it is, how stakeholders take their responsibility serious. Now, there is a German NGO called the Deutsche Umwelthilfe, the German Environmental Help. It's a non-government organization, and they have sued the largest German drugstore for using a misleading trust icon. And now that's nothing new so far, because those claims are out there a lot. The new thing is that they won the lawsuit. And that is crucial. And if, Newmark, just like Cometis, is in the field of communication, that's a complete disaster. That cost this company millions for that mistake that they did not do intentionally. I must say that. They're good people. They just didn't know better. Okay? Same thing is happening right now in the US. Delta Airlines is facing a lawsuit for about $1 billion for doing wrong carbon neutrality claims. So the green claiming is a huge issue, and I can only urge anybody in the field who is either within a company or advising companies, make sure that you know what trust icons mean and what, when you use them, how you can report towards them. And a crucial step is the reporting of the corporations. The main sources for stakeholders are the non-financial report within the annual report, which is already audited by many audit companies, and the separate ESG or sustainability report. Those are the two main sources for stakeholders to look for information, right? You do not look into very detailed policies because sometimes they're not publicly available. You don't look at any Twitter or X channels and look for the information. You want one single source of information. Therefore, for corporations, it means that their reporting will be expanded tremendously in the future. And therefore, they need experts to help them, number one, decide what needs to go into that report, and number two, how to collect the data, and then number three, advise them what to put on there right now. And a good accelerator for corporates to do that is that they understand all the ESG rating agencies out there who value and judge on the business model. They use those documents as well. And if they don't find the information in there, you get a bad rating. And that's bad for your refinancing, or even if you are in an IPO, if you want to go raise money publicly, that's not going to be happening if you don't disclose information on your ES and G activities. And like Gilbert said, the investors are a big stakeholder group in that whole game. And here's the research I brought you from an investment bank, and they asked investors, what are your biggest concerns when you're investing in ESG? And number one concern, that is a recent study, I believe, from February 23, is they're concerned about the quality of data they're given to. And number two concern is greenwashing, which directly relates to number one. Because if you give wrong information or no information, that's also a form of greenwashing. So let's talk a bit for the corporate data quality, how it works. And I'm coming back to the reports that need to be done. This is a pretty complex chart I decided to put in here anyway to show you it's a complex field we're all in. You always start with your materiality assessment, and it takes a long time to understand what is a good materiality assessment. In Europe, we currently talk about double materiality, which is impact and financial impacts on your corporation. And it all goes along, as you see that arrow continuing, it's about collecting data. You see the red columns here with you collect environmental data, employee data, human rights data, governance data, supply chain data, and it's all interconnected. And then you also evaluate your strategy, your risks and opportunities. And that comes then into a set of key performance indicator, which then needs to be implemented and checked. And all this is leading into a reliable report, which is going out there. So for corporations who believe they can hire one or two people to do that, I can tell you that's wrong. They will not succeed. They will, especially larger corporations, will need to build teams, and they will need to allocate new budgets. Talking about the second biggest concern about investors out there is greenwashing. And that's, to me, also a very big concern for all stakeholders, because if they are misled, they're going to get very angry, and that's very bad for the business. To give you a definition of what is transparency, and you see those quarters here on the right-hand side, if you have weak communication, but strong, claims out there. That's the maximum. Or if you have strong communication and strong false claims, that's the biggest mistake you can make. That's the ultimate greenwashing. But greenwashing is also about concealment, or distortion and exaggerations. We are the greatest. Our products do not have produce any waste. We are, the most family-friendly business in Africa. Don't do it if you can't prove it, because there are people and algorithms out there who will check on what you say. And that's also a very important message I can give you, is that the reports being produced are read by human beings. That is true. But I can only speak from my market observation. I think 80% usage of that information is being used by algorithms. So that's also, from a communication point, a complete game changer, because we have to communicate with human beings who are very interested in details, and also we have to communicate with algorithms. Here's what our definition of transparency looks like. And we have transformed that from dimensions and principles, and we brought that into the topics. I will have Newmark share our link with the Global ESG Monitor. That's our huge data project we are doing, where we're measuring transparency in corporate reporting worldwide. But the left-hand side of that chart is simplified, saying it's all kinds of criteria to give context to the information. And I can give you an example. As of now, you could easily say as a corporation, look, we have declined our CO2 emissions by 30% last year. Now, what does it say you? What does it tell you? Nothing. It tells you, okay, the company has decreased CO2 emissions by 30%, but it needs context to understand that message. For example, have you built 20 new production facilities in the same time? Or maybe you have closed 80% of your production facilities. Depending on the context you're giving, the information is reliable for the stakeholders. And I could continue talking for that forever, but it all summarized in the ESG and P, prosperity, which is important. We measure corporate reporting by over 4,000 criteria, and then corporates can buy a report from us, 60, 70 pages long, on where they have their gaps. And then they can start working from that step by step, patient, to close the gaps. Talking about the Global ESG Monitor, we have analyzed over 1,300 reports in the last 4 years across the globe. The website is in here, so I will when I share the presentation, you can download the reports. They are for free. That gives you a better understanding on how we measure and work on transparency and how we can help companies. And this is shown here. You get all kinds of spider graphs, which give you the, show you your gaps, and also explain you where you stand in your reporting compared to the market, compared to your peers. So look, 30 minutes, that's what I was giving by Newmark. And I hope I was able to give you an overview. Please feel free to ask questions. Happy to go into it. So I see one question is, share the presentation. Yes, of course. I will send it over to my business partners from Newmark, and they can upload it, or we will send a link and you can download it on Global ESG Monitor, but we'll figure that out.
Thank you for the presentation, Michael. I believe our audience have really had some understanding of what ESG is, where it's coming from, and also from a global standpoint. And I love what you said, that we should stop romanticizing ESG, and we are very guilty of that in Africa, because you may find that we say, or you see companies say, we do this, we do that, but they can't actually prove or show for it. And I like the fact that you're able to also highlight to us how to also report this, because that's one of the key areas that has become an issue for many businesses. But I want to bring to what you said. I believe Gilbert is still with us, more so to try and understand when it comes to ESG for the African context, because I know Gilbert did give us a point of view from its evolution where it came from, but I want to understand for how can African business are actually implementing it into their processes, how they're implementing it into their operations. Do you feel that this is entirely a relatively new process, or is it something that you can give key companies that are interested to do it tips and trends that they can consider moving forward as they try to implement ESG?
Thanks, Rina. That's a very good question. And Michael, I mean, I consider myself a student as well, and you've just schooled me quite significantly on this topic. So big thank you for that. And some of the elements you highlighted are indeed very pertinent to the question that Rina just asked. There should be, and I believe there is, a specific process that companies should adopt to ensure that they are truly ESG compliant, because like you said, Michael, ESG should not be just a matter of doing a couple of things and saying I am the good guy on the block, and because I feel like many companies are actually falling into the trap of greenwashing because they are going about ESG more to impress and to have good headlines, as opposed to being fundamentally geared towards a change in how they impact the world they live in. And in Africa, unfortunately, we continue to see many companies approaching ESG from a romanticized and tokenist point of view, as opposed to actually adopting fundamental changes that are measurable. And Michael did mention that anything that is not measurable, that can't hold its own from a point of view of credibility, should ideally be avoided. What I could perhaps say is that this could be due to lack of proper education on this by many C-suite executives, which brings in the need for many companies to get proper induction, if you will, and proper guidance and training. Like you said, Michael, many of the large companies will have a couple of people, some of them not necessarily properly trained in the matter, and those are the ones who are expected to carry such a large component of the business. So that's one of the trends that we have noticed. Again, not to disparage or put down the companies that are doing this, because this is a step in the right direction. Having a dedicated team is always a good thing. However, a team of 2-3 people who are not well versed in this particular area may not do justice to the needs of transforming a whole company into a company that has positive outcomes along environmental, social, and governance aspects. Because even from what Michael said, there are very scientific aspects that come with this particular field. You need to, first of all, have a verification of the challenges that you are trying to tackle in your context. Secondly, probably you need to have independent analysts to come and be able to check that what you're doing is indeed in line with your claims, et cetera, et cetera. And these are areas of expertise that may not be within that team, however good it may be. So I feel like, yes, what we see in terms of trend in Africa mostly is indeed appointing chief sustainability officers supported by a couple of people, and they tend to be the ones who drive particularly the reporting. And this, again, is a step in the right direction, but there is much more to be done. And that is mostly found in African companies, particularly small and medium enterprises. The larger companies are becoming, the more they are being expected to produce robust reports. So we are seeing companies in Africa across the board starting to generate reports. In Kenya, for example, recently we had the Safaricom companies, the biggest company in the country, produce a sustainable business report, which indicated what the company has been doing along various aspects of environment, social, and governance dimensions. Again, the reports are quite robust and they show that the companies are moving in the right direction. Perhaps we're not at the level of sophistication of what we have in Europe, as what Michael was saying, but I think that is the next step, because many of these companies are also starting to become regional companies. They have global investors and they're starting to have a global clout. So my expectation is that very soon they're going to need to be vetted, to have independent expertise to come in and help them to do this at a global standard. We also have global companies. Yes, Michael, you wanted to jump in?
Let me just jump in for a second, because I see some questions here in the Q&A, and I wanted to point out, sorry to interrupt you, Gilbert. I think the first step, especially for a region like Africa, is that you understand on the top level that you need to act. And I would tell every CEO the same thing in Africa that I do in Europe. If you don't do it, you will leave business soon or later. Because, like I said, we have global challenges, global warming, global inequality. Africa, unlike any other continent on the planet, is affected by those issues. And giving the growth numbers Gilbert said in the beginning, it is a huge need for action. So that's number one. And when I read in the Q&A here that the question is on the reporting, how viable is it, considering most companies in the first world countries have not signed certain climate change agendas? So all countries, I think 192 countries on the planet have signed the Paris Agreement. That means that they will bring laws into action where companies, no matter where they are, will have to comply to. Okay, number one for that. Number two questions is it really possible in the African context, considering the high costs of production and no laws to regulate some of the issues and the desire to compete with the developed world? Look, you have no other choice. Again, the answer is, again, you are facing global challenges just like we do. And it's not about complaining what the first or second or third world did in the past. We're facing it right now. So it's about, almost too late to start. But if you don't start, you will not be part of a supply chain anymore. And I give you an example with mobile phones. So you have here those beautiful iPhones. Where does the commodities come from for our batteries? And the problem is that big companies like Apple or Samsung, they cannot report all the way down supply chain to the last mining industry or mining CEO to guarantee there's no child labor involved. Once that is closed, there will be no child labor anymore. Because if that comes out, that they can't guarantee no child labor involved, they will not sell products. I would not buy a product where I knew there's child labor involved. Okay, and that's why it's a great chance. And I'm trying not to look at all the risk and lots of work and all the complaints here. It's a huge chance for the next generation of businesses. I mean, we started diving into this 5 years ago, and now it's about 40% of our revenues comes from sustainability advice. Now I'm talking to Gilbert, who I met through our global network, and we are starting this, or you guys are starting this educational piece. There is new ways in every industry to see a chance. And I can only hope to convince more and more people to jump on that train and partner and understand it's a process. It's not about judging. It's about what you do and how you start. And hopefully you all help to pick up the pace. And that's one of the questions which is also in there. How can the employees be involved? Educate them, training, have them be a part of it, and make sure it takes stamina. It's a long run. It's not a 100-meter run. It's a ongoing ultra marathon that we have to go through, and it is going to be uncomfortable.
Absolutely. I like what you've said, Michael, because you've really helped tackle all these questions, because ultimately for Africa, and if I'm to paraphrase what you're saying, is start wherever, whatever you can, start, but as much as possible, try to involve the right expertise so that you avoid a lot of the headaches that come with not doing it right. Because also, if you at some point are not able to do it well, you may be maybe targeted as having done greenwashing, which for me is a major risk for, especially for large upcoming companies, because the last thing you want is to be tagged as a company that is involved in greenwashing. One of the passions that I have personally is that African companies should also become global companies, like you said, Michael. And for that to happen, they need to be involved in global value chains and supply chains. And we know that that wouldn't happen going forward without being compliant with some of these regulations. And not only that, many of these regulations are new and many companies are not aware of them. So like you said, a lot of training may be needed going forward, especially here in Africa. And something else that I can add is that we do have some best practices, and some of them are even very close to home for us, because we have some companies, some global companies that we've been working with that have been very aggressive and bullish in terms of the kind of ESG programming that they have been putting in place. We've, for example, seen companies like AstraZeneca that we are very happy to work with, that has chosen an approach that leverages its expertise. So they haven't been trying to do things that are too far out of what they can do. They've decided we are a very strong scientific company in the healthcare space. So we are going to bring our scientific expertise in this particular sector to help tackle some of the major social healthcare challenges that Africa is facing. And they have introduced programs that are fundamentally tied to their business model. The interesting thing is these are sustainability programs, so they are not directly connected to their commercial objectives, but they have put so much effort and they have placed these programs under the direct leadership of the CEO in such a way that these programs are indeed very strongly anchored into the identity and the operations of the company. And they have specific independent agencies collect data, and they have experts develop papers on these particular programs so that they can hold water, and they can also even inform the academic community, and they can inspire other companies if they need to look at this. Because a large company like AstraZeneca, for example, would have challenges if it didn't have data to back up the impact that it claims to have achieved. So we hope and we anticipate that the approaches of companies like those are going to inspire African companies, especially the large ones that are aspiring to have a bigger impact. But obviously, the expertise needed for this is also going to have to be involved, simply because these are technical matters. You need to develop very specific programs that are designed to be traceable, measurable, and expandable or scalable as much as possible, because at the end of the day, scale is going to be important if a company is to claim that indeed it is having a net zero effect on the society in which it operates, particularly if it's a large company. So I feel like in Africa, foreign multinationals have taken a lead in terms of implementing ESG, but even they are not yet at the destination. Local companies, small, medium, and large companies from Africa are trying to catch up, but we believe that more can be done for them to avoid some of the headaches that Michael was talking about, which is things like being locked out of global supply chains and things like that. Thanks to you, Michael.
Shall we go through some of the questions?
Thank you.
In there?
Thank you very much, gentlemen. It's indeed evident that this conversation can keep going given the interactions we are having. Michael, there's also a question that touched on transparency when it comes to ESG reporting. The question reads, what are some of the best practices for transparent ESG reporting and communication? How does this benefit stakeholders?
Mm-hmm. I can recommend downloading the Global ESG Monitor. You will find a ranking, and then you can look, some of the companies, how they scored, and then you can download their report and look into it. That's probably a good start. However, that was our old methodology. The new one is coming out in a few weeks, that we are having our German analysis of the top 160 companies. So look at what those peers are doing. That would be a good start to learn about what's a high level of transparency.
Okay. Then there is the last question that touched on how can businesses balance ESG's goals with profitability and financial sustainability, particularly in resource-intensive industry, such as manufacturing and agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Look, that those companies, like all companies, will face dilemmata. So on one hand, we all have to go for a decarbonization strategy. On the other hand, you want to grow your business. Okay, so the question is, how do you grow your business in the most sustainable way? And again, it's not about just one or two criteria. If you dive into the field of sustainability, you easily come up to 1,000 criteria on what to report on. And that's the overall score you're reaching there is what's relevant for your stakeholders.
And just a quick addition to that, Michael. Rina, did you want to add something?
No, I was saying you can proceed, Gilbert.
Yes, no, I just wanted to say that when it comes to transparency, coming back to that question, I think that the only way to do this right is to consider that transparency is a non-negotiable, because there is no point trying to do something as noble as introducing ESG and then refuse to be transparent about even the challenges that the company may be encountering. I think corporations tend to be very fearful of mentioning some of the challenges that they have encountered in implementing certain initiatives. But personally, I think that communicating some of the challenges, and here I'm talking from the perspective of a communications professional, communicating the challenges should be part of the process. It has to be understood that this company is making efforts to break new ground, because let's remember that ESG is evolving every single day. So a lot of the initiatives may indeed be trial and error, and the error part should be part of the communication. So I think that transparency should not just be on the positive, but also on some of the challenges. And that should be encouraged, in my view, and companies should be encouraged to be open about some of these challenges.
Thank you for that, Gilbert. It's indeed very evident from this conversation that we can't truly exhaust ESG in the given 1 hour, 30 minutes that we had allocated for this masterclass. And that's why we envision to have this as a monthly series, bringing on board key experts who we can discuss this in depth and also try to have and change essentially how Africans view ESG. Because I like what you and Michael has said, that the first thing that needs to happen is starting. And don't just say you are sustainable, you have ESG, yet you can't prove it, because we have all been guilty, us being sustainable enthusiasts, we've all been guilty of that. And I know from these sessions, we're able to take away key insights and key information that we can go back and apply and reflect upon, just to also see how best can African, given that even if you're African, we have our own fact speciality, we are actually regarded from a global standpoint. As in closing, do you have any final words from each of our speakers? I'll start off with Michael.
Look, I think that look at sustainability activities as a huge chance for your business and for your own profession. And if you do that, you will start a journey which is, very exciting and very, futuristic for yourself.
Thank you for that, Michael. On to Gilbert.
Yes, when it comes to sustainability, ESG, it should be viewed as, yes, like Michael said, is a major opportunity, but also it shouldn't be used as an opportunity to greenwash, because I think for me, that's one of the biggest risks. And for us as communication professionals, we have to constantly remind companies that when it comes to building a sustainable business, ESG is not really an option. It's really an imperative for business survival, expansion, and also for business to inspire the next generation, because at the end of the day, businesses can come and go, but we have to make sure that the future is secured for everyone. So I think it should be taken seriously by small, medium, and large companies alike.
Thank you for that, Gilbert.
Thank you,
yes,
Rina.
Indeed, it's very true. It's not just, we do see many of the reports coming from large enterprises, big multinational, but there is an opportunity for SMEs too, because this is where the world is headed. And if you're not going to shape up in the limelight of sustainability, you're going to be left behind. Well, I believe we've come to the end of our masterclass, being the first, but it won't be the last. We shall sure engage with you, our audience, through our platforms. And I want to encourage you that you can visit our LinkedIn page, where you can follow more updates and further webinars or masterclasses regarding ESG and topics that touch across what the world is heading towards. I've been your moderator for the day, Rina Modhoni. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to also see you on to the next session. Thank you.